Hi guys, I am Vitold and we can all finally say it. This is the new BMW GS, the R1300GS, the successor to the R1250GS, which I feel may stay with us a bit longer than we've anticipated. And I'll explain in my review what I mean by that. This is a very important moment for the whole motorcycle industry, regardless of if we're here interested in this particular motorcycle or even in the adventure segment, simply because this is one of the most popular motorcycles in the world. Actually, the one that has been the most commonly bought in Germany for years, so it's home country. This means that the stakes are extremely high for the manufacturer, for BMW, and the brand needs to do its absolute best in order to not lose the current clients, while also appealing to a potentially wider group at the same time. So far, there haven't been many drastic changes to the big GS in its history, and this may be the most extreme one yet so far. So let's see how they've done. As I've got this R13GS in the trophy trim with lots and lots of additional equipment to try and test it after I've tested and reviewed for you all other big adventure motorcycles that are currently on the market. I also just made a direct comparison of them all in my previous video where I included BMW R1250GS. In one of the next videos, I'll put this new GS against the top motorcycles from that rank. I need you to know that I got this new GS directly from BMW, and I want to be transparent about it. It wasn't a month or even a week. I covered the fuel costs. I had to get up extremely early one day, and I wasn't sent to Spain, Portugal, Greece, or any other sunny place, but I stayed with the bike in my home city, in my home country, so it has all been as fair as possible. And so this is my honest review as always. In this review, I'll show you what this new GS is like to ride in terms of handling, suspension, engine, and overall performance, what all the newly added systems are about, and if and how they work. It's not that simple with some of them, and there are some insiders, let's call them tricks, to learn. And based on my experiences with all large and mid-size adventure motorcycles, I'll tell you what this bike is good for, where it excels, because it does in some places, what should be fixed or changed still, or now it should be changed, who I feel should buy it and who may want to avoid it. Now, real life changes versus the previous GS will be in another video that's coming, so definitely do subscribe to stay tuned. Now let's start with what it's like when approaching this new R1300GS and getting on it, because there are some features that can be helpful here. Have you heard the word inclusive recently? It's becoming quite popular. However, in the case of this new GS, it's actually a very good thing, as if equipped with additional system called adaptive vehicle height control, this GS can lower itself by 3 centimeters when at a standstill and raise itself in situations where you won't be touching the ground. Here both front and rear suspension work together to drop the bike down and enable easy access also for shorter riders and whoever simply wants their GS to be lower when at a standstill. With a standard seat, the seat height is at 85 centimeters, and you may as usually raise the seat on its own to 87, so by 2 centimeters. But if you have this system and enable its work, the bike will drop from 85 to 82 centimeters, and this is a significant difference. Now, having lowered seat, which I happened to have on this GS, it's 2 centimeters lower than standard, so it starts at 83 centimeters, and with the system enabled, it's going down to 80 centimeters, which is crazy and the lowest out of the entire segment of large adventure motorcycles. That's why I'm saying it's inclusive, because now really short riders can also ride it without getting the lowered suspension, which also impacts the overall handling. It changes the geometry. So this now is a perfect situation, because you have a bike with its full capabilities, with its full suspension, travel, and whatever it can do in a regular GS. You're not sacrificing anything, while just having a possibility of, when you need it, having the bike down. That's really cool. Harley was the first. BMW does it better. 1 more centimeter. However, in BMW, okay, anyway, I'll get to that. In my case, being 1 meter 83 centimeters tall or 6 feet tall, this actually is too low for me. It's too low to confidently support myself, and I don't have as much leg strength when they're bent so much more. So in the end, I did disable this system. I appreciate it's there, it's not for me. But if the bike had the standard seat, I personally would likely just get this thing just to have it. I probably would not use it, but for riders shorter than me, This is really cool stuff that worked actually reliably at all times. There are two more things related to it, which are that the bike may also drop down when you open the side stand, but it will raise itself to a tall position when you open the center stand and are ready to put the bike on it. It takes around 2 to 5 seconds waiting for it, but it's worth it, and putting this new R1300GS on a center stand is really easy, and I do appreciate that. Other than this, the lowered seat is pretty comfortable despite being rather hard to touch when you just do it very unprofessionally with your hand. Then when sitting on it, it doesn't feel too hard somehow, and this is how I like it. It's also wide enough in the rear part, and overall I've got no complaints comfort-wise here. Knee angle is not the best in this setup, and I'm definitely too cramped for my liking, but normally I wouldn't go for a lowered seat option. It's better to invest in the adaptive height system and leave yourself an option of still getting a lowered seat later, because you can maintain a more comfortable knee angle. If it was in normal seat height, so those 2 centimeters higher, and I've sat actually on such a 1300GS, it feels better, but still perhaps a seat in the taller position would be a good idea for longer rides in combination with this adaptive ride height. Still could have the pegs a little bit lower. I would prefer it that way. Now in this particular setup, you may also adjust the passenger seat height without removing anything, and just by lifting it and moving it slightly forward, backward. That's great. What's also very important is that the location of a gear and brake lever in relation to the foot pegs is fantastic to me, and I mean it. I often find myself in a position of having the levers way too high than I can comfortably reach with my feet, especially on mid-size adventure motorcycles. And here in this big GS, it is actually perfect, and I don't need any feet stretching classes to change gears and to brake with my right foot comfortably. Getting the Enduro Package Pro, you should be getting the levers, both of them down there, and foot pegs adjustable according to this configuration tool on BMW's website. Now, overall position on this GS is a typical big GS position, and you can feel it immediately. It means that the very wide handlebar is there, and you've got to reach for it, having your arms pretty much fully extended, again, if you are my size. In the beginning, it may feel like too much, then it feels like a very dominant position, and it likely stimulates your confidence. You may actually know this mechanism of fake it till you make it, saying known, for example, from TED Talks. Just sitting in this position may affect your brain and your feeling of strength, power, and dominance. I do like that. That's why I call it the typical big GS position. Later, at times, you may also notice specific thing, that is you unintentionally opening the throttle when doing very tight maneuvers. Me being at my limits of how far I can reach forward with my arms, when turning, one of my hands, sometimes when I turn left, needs to go so much more forward, and so it affects my wrist, causing a rolling motion, and this is the effect. Adding the throttle. It's still not a bike for very small people, and no adventure motorcycle is by definition, but this one definitely still isn't, even though it looks the way it looks now. It's good to check by yourselves. That's the conclusion here. In all variants, there are front LED indicators incorporated into the handguards. I think I like that, as thanks to it, they are really large and, well, obviously, being very strong, they are visible, being LEDs. You may also get a GS with standard ones if you get an optional Enduro Package Pro that you can get on all trims except for the green one, which is set here the way it is. So most of the equipment you can customize, choosing those trims, those colors, but certain singular things are sometimes limited to those certain trims. Very few though, thankfully. The position on the bike is still upright in my case, and I like it. So it is all fine here. A side note here is that visually you can see a very big difference between the 1300 and the previous 1250, and the new one is visibly smaller and with narrower fuel tank that's now also smaller, with 19 liters and a pretty large flat phone compartment that has a USB inside, but it's got no wireless charging, which I consider a lost opportunity. On this bike, there's that fun texture on the fuel tank and some part of it on top that feels like some kind of rubber that doesn't scratch, and I do like that. Just as I like this particular trophy trim color, very nice, and I'm glad I could choose this one. The new front light looks good when you look at it from front directly to me, but looking just slightly from the side, I'm not exactly going to fall for it. Regardless of a trim, take a look at the nice engine oil level window. Well, I call that attention to detail. Now, overall design is controversial, and I feel that some people may be happier with the new one. That's gonna sound trivial, but some others will like the appeal of the good old 1250 that appears more like a tank in comparison. But weight-wise, the new one is lighter, and I personally don't feel a difference. It's a big talking point here, 12 kilograms. Likely at some point, they're just heavy enough that spotting a difference isn't as obvious. 237 kilograms of the base bike with fuel it's fine. There is that smaller fuel tank and lighter ion lithium battery, which is a better solution overall until you've got to pay and replace it. Other than these two, there are some real weight savings, and it's a good direction, I think, and a huge achievement by BMW because they've added new features, but the weight still should be lowered significantly, and that means engineering and design departments have done their job right. Now, to me, this new GS doesn't feel super light when moving it around, and you've got to be careful. It's not super high, so this actually helps. Now, in general, visually, it's now quite approachable, and this may be tempting to some, I think. It's a whole different style, it's a whole different language now, and you mostly see that visually. BMW have put an end to the asymmetrical front light that isn't pretty, but is iconic. No more of that here. We've got rear indicators serving as positioning and stop lights like in BMW S1000XR. Between them, in the place of a tail lamp, instead of that there is a radar, or at least a cover of that radar if you don't have it actually on your GS. Design-wise, it may not be super pretty, but I can assure you that it works in terms of stoplights, as these are very strong. So if you worry about other drivers realizing whether you're braking or not, don't. It's okay. I wasn't a fan of this solution at first, but I'm okay with it now, seeing how it works in real life. It may be a slightly different story with the indicators that indeed will not be seen as clearly, since they are sort of surrounded with a strong red light, especially when you're stopping, so with the brake lights. But in general, I don't consider this to be any sort of an issue. The front light is always LED, and if you pay extra for a more advanced option called Headlight Pro, you get a headlamp that looks the same but has more LEDs inside, and also then you're getting cornering light. But that's it. There's no anti-glare function that would let you ride with a high beam on and still not blind other drivers. A camera would be necessary for it, like in cars. I've heard actually such statements somewhere about this GS, and no, they are not true. It doesn't have that. It's just cornering. The rest of a GS's heritage in terms of style is there. So the two cylinders of a two-cylinder boxer engine sticking to the sides of the bike, which I only actually kicked once when stopping the bike, so that's a success and not a big deal in the end. And that smart panniers that change their size system can be here now with an addition of those side and top seals covering the electrical components. One seal on this bike is already lost, two others are still there trying to fight for their life. Another smart thing is that inside the panniers, I believe that there is a dedicated place to put those seals once you install the cases. The cases are then locked using a key fob that is, by the way, enormous itself. So they've got central locking. But what is it like to ride engine-wise and then handling and then suspension-wise? I'll start with the engine. Now here comes a short pause. Well, generally not a big fan of a boxer engine despite being aware of its advantages. And these advantages are, first of all, amazing torque that lets you overtake super easily regardless of a gear that the bike is in. There is now 1300 cubic centimeters of displacement, 145 horsepower and 149 newton-meters of torque, and it's torque that helps you overtake and in general accelerate without having to reach the maximum power, usually at some of the highest RPM. So you roll the throttle and R1300GS flies away. It's a quick bike, and the 1250 is also quick. Is the power delivery smooth? Absolutely it is. Does it pull from the bottom? Oh yes, and I love it as it gives me the feeling of confidence, as I know that no matter what happens, within reason, of course, I always am able to start moving away quickly. And this is fantastic. Does it have good manners? No, it doesn't. As always with a two-cylinder boxer here. It's not that the handlebar, foot pegs or the seat vibrate. Not at all. It's not the thing. It's all good there. But when it's idle, for example, you definitely know that this thing is alive. it's the whole bike that is sort of gently but rapidly shaking in that irregular manner. The thing is that it's kind of nervous type of shaking to me, and this way I just don't like it. It's kind of making me stressed. It's grabbing my attention. I pay attention to it because it's like you're sitting and like suddenly it feels like something is wrong with it. And combined with the sound of a boxer engine being even with an aftermarket exhaust, it's a nah from me. This Akrapovic exhaust that you see, don't bother. Save all that money or just get a proper racing exhaust that will make this boxer sound tougher and deeper at least, because this setup is not doing that definitely. At low speeds, engaging and disengaging at the powertrain by opening and closing the throttle can get a bit shaky regardless of if you're in a road or rain mode. It needs some focus and control as it's not that super smooth. Eco mode is super sluggish and I recommend that you stay away from it unless you're 100 years old and you would fall apart because of the hard acceleration in other modes. On a wet and cold surface, I stuck to rain mode, as in road traction control wouldn't stop me from doing things with the throttle that are not recommended, and the bike would swerve when spinning its rear wheel. I would expect it to not allow for that, but there's only as much that those systems can do. In rain, when accelerating very hard, it would do better, and only on a white solid line. In this mode, in rain mode, it would slide rapidly, but the cut-off power came in time. Another time, having those pretty fine Metzeler Tourens next to tires warmed up, it would pull wheelies in the second gear even on wet. In dynamic mode, it's really getting violent and even aggressive, I would say, and in the end there is a considerable difference between the modes, which is nice. Now, why I also don't exactly love this engine is because of when I accelerate on a GS, it feels like it's getting tired and it's just not healthy for the engine to push it that much. It's a combination of sound and shakiness at higher RPM that discourages me from doing that, but I do like doing that, so it's just not in line with my preference here. What's nice is that once you switch from neutral to the first gear, the engine RPM slightly raise, so it's easier to set off, and I find it very helpful, and I'm glad that BMW listened to the complaints about the ease of stalling the Boxer engine sometimes. I also like the transmission that works perfectly to me, along with the clutch that grabs gradually exactly as I feel it should. Quick shifter isn't the quickest, it needs to be properly kicked, but it works 100% reliably, and it is not too harsh when changing gears. It is worth mentioning that in rather cold environment, when at a standstill after not very aggressive riding, the cooling fans would switch on for some time. I wouldn't feel any heat coming from the engine, so it's all good, but perhaps squeezing all components together actually affected the airflow, and it will be something to pay attention to in the summer. Don't know yet, we will see. Hopefully not, but clearly there is some activity in the cooling system in this generation. So in the end, if you don't like accelerating hard and like the sound of this engine, you should be absolutely fine with it and forget about what I just said that happens if you push it, because you won't do it. You will benefit from all that torque down low while still being able to ride really quickly if you want to without reaching high RPM. To me, it's just not exactly the style of an engine that I like. Now, having that out of the way, I can openly tell you that this thing handles just amazing. I've always been blown away by it on an R1300GS, before that on a 1200GS, and this one is simply fantastic to turn as well. What's special is that it does such a great job at low speeds, but also at high speeds. I believe it's because of three things that BMW do very well. First is this front telelever, now with an addition of an Evo word suspension in the front that prevents the new GS, just like the old GS, from diving during any kinds of crazy or even not crazy things. Second is fantastic balance thanks to low center of gravity, largely because of those two large cylinders sticking to the sides and not up. And thirdly, because of well set up suspension just in general. Some of us, myself included, were interested if moving the transmission underneath the engine now from the rear of it means that the engine is now lifted, that it's higher from the ground. Now, we've put the 1300 and 1250 side by side, and it doesn't appear so, but the more scientific answer comes from BMW, which is that there simply was already enough space underneath the engine to put the transmission, so we don't lose anything. On a twisty road, or just having fun in the city, where you're changing lanes often, this R1300 is freaking mental. You will be doing things that the moment later you would realize that what the hell were you even doing? And coming to a conclusion that you won't let your kids ever ride a motorcycle after seeing how you yourself ride it. It sounds dramatic, but in fact it means that the level of balance, composure, no unpredictable behaviors and overall control are from another galaxy. And it's still not an advertisement. I'm just glad that BMW managed to keep the best of a GS in this new GS. The amount of fun of riding when you push this bike is just amazing, and there's no denying that, at least from my perspective, in terms of what I like doing on a motorcycle and what I consider nice and great and enjoyable. Braking in a corner, go ahead, no worries. Accelerating, feel free to do it and it will stay perfectly on course. And I mean perfectly on course. This GS gives you full decision power and it won't surprise you with anything like straightening up, nor will it fight with you or try to prevent you from tightening a corner. There is a top score from me here. At low speeds, it's again balance, predictability and control that let you squeeze pretty much anywhere you want, to let you ride perfectly straight when filtering traffic, when doing tight maneuvers between stationary cars, and whatever else you want to do on this GS. This is a segment's benchmark that will make filtering almost pure pleasure. Now that handlebar is really wide, with even wider handguards that don't exactly help in avoiding cars' mirrors, so it's not exactly ideal in terms of that, but handling is terrific and a really enjoyable part of riding R1300GS. Now, speaking of suspension a moment ago, there's an optional electronic suspension now called DSA instead of ESA, but it does the same thing basically. My R1300GS in the trophy trim has two modes available under the new sort of command center, road mode and dynamic mode, if I'm in certain riding mode. These are suspension modes available to you when you're in certain riding mode. Now there is a third one after you spend 3 days trying to figure out when to use the scroll wheel, when to use which switch and in which direction to get through the menu to the settings. And that third mode in terms of suspension is enduro mode. It also can be there if you manage to first pre-select enduro riding mode and then you have it selected again without digging into the settings, which is all in all absurd, I feel, and very not German-like to me, as it's just messy and confusing. In this GS, I can actually feel the difference between the two main modes, so road and dynamic. However, they are not that obvious as you know. Something works differently, but it's not so super easy to point out what exactly. And by the way, there, deep in the settings, where the enduro mode is buried, you may also further customize all of those modes. In the end, I stayed with road as it's the most comfortable while letting you keep plenty of control and having the bike still planted well enough. And the word planted is one of the key words when it comes to the differences, to explaining the differences between this one and dynamic suspension mode. The second word would be dense, as this is what it reminds me of when I would switch from road suspension mode to dynamic suspension mode. The whole bike seems sort of more connected and stiffer, but on its own, riding over speed bumps can give you a good indication of the differences, and in road, it feels like on top of the bump, the rear end is allowed by suspension to travel further up. And then when the suspension compresses again under the weight of the bike once you go down, so the weight of the bike and your gentleman's or lady's self, after riding off of that speed bump, it also goes further down, so there's more compression, and there is more also of what I call a float or a bounce afterwards. So there is the moment of it stabilizing. Now in dynamic, it feels like it's sticking to the speed bump, and suspension is being more connected and keeps the bike's body in a less changed position in relation to the wheels. This is a semi-active suspension on this one, so it's not that super simple, and in the end, it doesn't simply feel like it's just stiffer or harder, but exactly, it's more connected, it's less bouncy and not crazily much stiffer in terms of comfort. At least it's not that huge of a difference to me in terms of riding over bumps simply. It's very, very interesting actually. To me, in the end, I stuck to the road mode. I would be happy with it. What's also very interesting is why we are limited to 2-3 suspension modes, while other manufacturers in other bikes give us fluid adjustment from one extreme setting to the other extreme one with many steps to choose from on the fly. I guess that perhaps maybe someone thought that less is more in terms of choices here. I don't entirely agree, but I feel that the road mode is pretty comfortable and it keeps the bike composed enough to just stick with it and have it do the job on a highway at high speeds, on a twisty road, and on a bumpy one, anywhere outside or inside the city. I'm pretty happy with this suspension, but there may be more comfortable ones in the segment. I'll leave that for my coming comparison with other motorcycles. Front wheel travel is the same as in the 1250, so 19 centimeters, while in the rear it's still 20 centimeters. Ground clearance is unknown for now. In 1250 it's 18.5 centimeters. And it's interesting because if the engine hasn't already gone up, or at least not visibly up, does it mean that the transmission is now eating some of that ground clearance? It's a possibility. There is also an option of so-called sports suspension that should be having larger travel, but it's quote spring travel in the front and in the rear, which doesn't exactly tell me all that much. It's not obvious if it exactly means that the bike is taller, like an adventure variant till now in 1250, or not. Is this exactly suspension travel, or is it just the spring travel? Well, it's a bit confusing. But what we know is that the front rim in a GS is 19 inches while the rear is 17, so it's a pretty standard setup in the segment. There are 3 types of rims to choose from. So cast alloy, spoked, and a new solution by BMW that's called forged enduro wheels that are supposed to be pretty light, and it's explained as them being first cast and then forged. This should be as strong as spoked, but lighter and maintaining the looks of more standard rims if that's what you prefer. The topic of suspension is very much connected in the case of BMW in the GS family to brakes. And somehow they managed to make out of a perhaps boring sounding topic a really exciting one. Now, when have you seen a motorcycle that would be sort of self-leveled when squeezing the front brake very, very hard? Well, likely the last time you saw a big GS or an RT. Now you'll see and feel it on this one as well, because seeing is one thing and feeling is an entirely differently experience. The front lever suspension, now with Evo in its name, is a unique thing that BMW installs in their big boxer powered GSs that really limits almost all the front end dive. Now, combining that with really strong and easy to dose brakes, it allows you to experience something that you won't experience on any other motorcycle, even on a KTM 1290 Super Adventure S with an optional anti-dive system. It's nothing compared to how this thing works here, keeping the bike flat. Adding now also integrated brakes to the GS, so both of them working at the same time, you're getting a great balance and grip off the front and rear tire. That makes you want to squeeze those brakes more and more just to feel the deceleration in your body. It's crazy. This is one of a kind and much better experience than on anything else in the segment. The rear brake is fine, easy to feel, but I know from some other motorcycles that it could be calibrated better to give you even better results. But it's fine. There's cornering, ABS and traction control in standard, but all of the good things that I just said apply only if you pay BMW to give you those good and strong brakes. So if you get yourself a bike with red BMW text on the calipers, you will enjoy the heck out of it and will be safe on the road. If you don't get this option of sport brake, for whatever reason, called it this way, you won't get those good brakes. Now, what in the world? I wonder who thinks, oh, this is likely our most important product and the whole world will be looking at our hands. We've got to do our absolute best. We've got to perform and make our clients impressed so that they storm the showrooms now. And then that someone agrees or even comes up with an idea of, oh, you know what? Let's give all our loyal clients who will buy this new R1300GS crappy brakes so that they crash at the first corner or whenever someone cuts them off or brakes very hard in front of them. Ha! Amazing idea! We will sell even more of those. Anyway, sports brake with red text on it, and there's a quote, improved brake performance. I would say just equip the top bike, and actually any bike for that matter, with the best brakes and best tires possible. Let me tell you about wind protection, as this GS can have an electrically adjustable windscreen, which I love as an idea for 2 reasons. First, that it's super convenient, and second, that it's an awesome gadget to me. You may operate it after setting this dedicated switches function to operating windshield. The range of motion is really large, and to me, sitting still those 2 centimeters lower on the lowered seat, the wind protection is very good in the tallest position of the windscreen. Side deflectors also seem to do the job, and they definitely look also impressive in terms of their size. There aren't many turbulences even at high speeds, very high speeds, and I'm overall impressed and wouldn't even look for a replacement windscreen. This would be the only motorcycle in the segment that is that good right now, but then again, This one has a 2 centimeters lower seat, so I'm sitting 2 centimeters lower than I would otherwise sit normally. So I still suggest that you try it yourself, and in case it turns out to be too short, then just replace it. But there's been a pretty good job done with it by BMW. I'm a huge fan of electric adjustment. One thing that I'm not a fan of is that whenever you switch the engine off, the bike lowers the screen on its own for no apparent reason. Then it's supposed to raise it back up after you switch it on and start moving. So just switching it on won't do it. You have to start moving. Now, if there's no point in that, lowering it, then it's just wasting energy from the battery, and the whole operation is kind of annoying to me. I don't get it. There's no way, unfortunately, to switch it off, apparently. About the entirely new stuff and this new way of controlling some of the features with a switch, with a function that you can choose for it yourself. Now, first, there's this button on top of the left side of the handlebar that activates a new menu with a list of certain functions predefined that a given GS can have. Then, using the wheel, you can choose the function that you want to control at a given moment, and you have to accept it with a third switch or by moving the wheel to the right to accept it. From now on, this function is adjustable via this new up and down arrow switch. And one more thing that is sort of a trick is that you can also assign one more function to it that will be activated whenever you press and hold. So you can have two dedicated functions at the same time. I think that's pretty smart on one hand, while on the other, to me, it's the whole system, the whole idea of operating it that way is that's quite distracting, as it's not also shown which chosen function it is once you get out of the menu. So you have to remember, I'm generally not a fan of the scroll wheel, the huge one, as I also never know when to use it and when I should use the regular menu switch that's there, but maybe that's just me. One thing that I've got to openly complain and strongly about is that this wheel adds width because it's so big, and so reaching for the indicator switch to me is definitely uncomfortable, and I usually have to take part of my hand off and move it away from the grip to use the indicators. And obviously I'm not holding the grip very well at that moment, so when braking it makes using indicators a real challenge for me. I have to change my position to hold the tank with my knees more. I think a 4-direction button could be more intuitive. Maybe not exactly a joystick like in Triumph Tiger 1200 that appears just like an indicator switch, but more like, for example, KTM's solution. And one of the new options is a rear radar that scans the road on the sides behind you, and it can warn you if there are any vehicles potentially in your blind spot by lighting up an LED in a given mirror on that particular side. It can be switched off, but I personally am a fan of this solution as it's an important safety feature, I feel. Just like tire pressure monitoring system that's there in this GS. Thanks to BMW for that, by the way. As for how this blind spot system works, that BMW for some reason calls lane change warning instead of a blind spot monitoring system or assistant like everyone else does, there are 3 things that I would like to mention here. The first is that the light incorporated into the mirrors is kind of easy for me to ignore, as it appears to be just another vehicle light that reflects in the mirror. So I wish that it was done in a way that it's done in the Ducati Multistrada, so outside of the mirror, maybe being red instead of orange, which is close to some yellow lights of cars and trucks. The second thing is that it generally works reliably, and only sometimes it may be getting confused and flashing also after you changed a lane, so double check. And the third thing is that I just wish that those mirrors were just larger, and then the need for this system wouldn't be as strong or as big, but I like that it's there. The other new option known in BMW from the RT model is the front radar that allows you to equip the GS with adaptive cruise control, so setting a desired gap between you and any vehicle in front of you in the same lane, making the bike automatically brake to keep that set distance, and then to speed up to speed that you select within the range of 30 to 160 kilometers per hour. And you may change gears in the meantime and it won't disengage. It starts adapting pretty far away so that it won't later have to do anything too dramatic to keep the desired set distance. Of course, as long as the one in front of you doesn't also do any emergency braking in the meantime, as this will require your intervention to successfully and safely stop or slow down very much. Now, you may change the sensitivity in the settings and also switch on or off an entire function of collision warning. And here we go, emergency braking now. Collision warning is fine as it displays red stuff on the bike's display to warn you in case this is where you look instead of the road, which is quite likely on many today's modern motorcycles with very engaging tablets. It also can shake the bike slightly to sort of wake you up, and well, here comes my dilemma. I appreciate that it's there and it works. This warning is not too brutal. It can surprise you in case you actually do have things under control. And this actually happened to me, and since it's a system based just on a radar, so it's not that intelligent, if there is a curve in front of you, but you are still going straight approaching that curve, and the radar notices that you are approaching quickly another vehicle that's in that corner already in another lane, it misunderstands it, or it may misunderstand the situation, and it may start warning you. In my case, it hasn't been activating any emergency braking yet, thankfully, but just know that it's not perfect. I think I would still keep it on anyway and maybe get scared by it a few times, but perhaps it will save someone's butt at some point. This is how this one works, and this is the reason for the most controversy in terms of this new GS's design, as it creates that empty elevated forehead that pushed the headlights down. If not for this, I'm guessing that the reaction to the design would have been much smoother and more positive. I do keep my fingers crossed for BMW reacting to that, as I do totally understand the mixed feelings of people who either own or they don't own a GS, but they were interested in getting the new one. Using this new, let's call it quick menu, you may adjust optional adaptive cruise controls gap, you may set heated grips, rider's heated seat, electric windscreen, traction control, suspension, but 2 settings out of the 3, and adaptive ride height. Deep in the bike settings, there are some things that I've got no idea what they are, and this requires a user's manual, for example, in case of a devoir, which would translate in my language into English into 2, just a majestic 2, and that's it. Or OPZP, I've got no bloody idea. But it can be on, it can be off, or it can be necessary. It is something probably, but I wish it was written in a self-explanatory way. Or do it like in KTM, so showing on an animation on the screen what it does exactly. And this leads me to the display, which appears to be just like the old screen installed on all also medium and lower class BMW motorcycles today. It is clear and not too confusing once you're in the settings and playing with them. Give it some fun, just some themes that I personally would appreciate. There's only this sport instrument panel now that presents a nice analog rev counter. I'm a little bit disappointed as I expected something exciting here. At the same time, guys, don't mind that massive chunk of plastic right above the display blocking your view. It's a GPS mount that doesn't have to be there. And another smart thing to mention is that when the engine is cold, the red line on the rev counter starts earlier, and then it moves gradually with tiny steps further and further along with the engine getting ready to rock, getting warmer. I had an opportunity to test hill start control that automatically engages on a hill, and that is helpful. In settings, you may also set it to manual and activate it yourself using the brakes. It's worth to know if you want to have more control over the system. Now, a super fun fact that caused a lot of confusion, that's auxiliary lights on the sides of this particular trim of a GS. Do you know how to switch them on? That's the path. Go to the menu, switch all the way to the right to settings, get in, go down to vehicle settings, go inside, go 3 positions down to lights, get inside, select auxiliary lights, and then switch on, and now they're on. I would prefer an additional switch somewhere. There is some space. Well, maybe I am a little bit too old-fashioned with that, but it also perhaps explains the necessity of that front collision warning. Then as for riding modes, there's one more thing that I cannot comprehend here. This particular GS, optioned the way it is, it has 7 riding modes. Eco, Rain, Road, Optional Dynamic Pro, Enduro, and Optional Enduro Pro. The thing is that there is a nice separate mode button on the right handlebar that lets you easily change the modes, but you can only use 4 modes that you first have to choose. Now, why 4 and not all of them? If I wanted to use Enduro, which on this bike hasn't been pre-selected initially, I would have to travel again all the way to the menu, deselect some of the predefined already modes, instead select Enduro, and then I could access it with a button on the fly. Why? Just why? Again, less choices, more? Well, you may also connect your phone to the bike system to see what's going on. That's nice. There's an SOS button hidden and an ignition button that you may lock the handlebar with by holding it. That's because R1300GS comes with a keyless ignition and fuel cap that I am a great fan of, actually. Just remember that you can open the fuel cap after switching the ignition off, and there is a close-up of a handlebar that you may change an angle of it. I like that, it's very cool. What's missing, and I notice people loving to point that out with huge satisfaction, so I'll do it with huge sadness, but with a call to action at the same time. There is no backlight of the switches on the handlebar like there is on the Ducati Multistrada V4 and Triumph Tiger 1200. Please add it, BMW. But thankfully there is still this brilliant drive shaft, and I love the solution instead of a chain. It also looks nice to me visually as opposed to a dirty hanging chain. Now if some of you keep taking a peek at my leather office chair that I'm using, it's called the 7G11 from Power Seats, and it adjusts in 18 ways electrically and then a few more manually, like adjusting the armrests and some functions of the headrest forward back. So check them out at powerseats.eu. So who is this new BMW R1300GS for, and where does it do best? Who should be getting it? Who should not be getting it? First of all, let me describe it as the good old GS with all, and I mean it, all of its technical advantages. Just now, firstly, packed with top-notch tech that may need some tweaking here and there still, and secondly, in a different form and style that is now controversial. But then the old one has been controversial too, with that bare look and an asymmetrical lamp compared to the competition. This one is definitely a smaller motorcycle now, and the visual part of it makes you feel differently on it. It's like switching from BMW X5 to BMW X3. Yes, X3 is lighter, it may consume less fuel, it's easier to park, but is that the reason to prefer it? To some, yes, but to some not. Same here. If you like your R1200 or 1250GS, now I don't entirely feel that you will have to be automatically a huge fan and fall in love with this one, despite it being still the same kind of an animal. What that one great thing about the GS is to me is that it's good almost no matter what you want to do with it, as long as it's not revving and listening to the engine sound. This is generally unusual characteristic of a motorcycle, and I cannot say the same about all other motorcycles in this segment, while it's a major factor to not fall behind pretty much anywhere. Riding in the city is super enjoyable to me and can be either an injection of adrenaline or can be calming and comfortable. This GS gives you a choice. Outside of the city, it is comfortable, it is composed and under control, which is what I value in such a motorcycle, in any motorcycle. Add to that amazing flexibility of an engine, and some of you may find it to be a perfect blend. The weakest point of it to me is still the clunky engine, but if you lower the windscreen, if you ride at higher speeds, you may focus on the wind noise instead of the engine noise. That's sounding like it's going to fall apart. The quality is there, new tech actually works and isn't just some useless gadgets. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10 on Vitol's recommendation board, and at the same time, I believe that due to the rather dramatic change in style and a new direction, it might be a perfect moment for the competitors to attack and try to get better themselves as alternatives for people who will be replacing their R1200 and 1250 GSs. And a direct comparison of this new R1300 with the top big adventure bikes is coming. So subscribe and see you soon.